So what is oogenesis? Now the process of formation of a haploid functional ovum from diploid female germ cells or oogonial cells is referred to as oogenesis. Now the first thing you all have to notice is oogenesis occurs along different time points. Notice the flowchart, all of you. A part of oogenesis happens even before the girl child is born, that is in the ovary of the fetus itself. A part of it happens between birth and the time the child attains puberty, and the remaining starts at the time of puberty and continues throughout the adult reproductive life. So, what happens during the fetal life? Now, during the fetal life, there are cells which differentiate within the ovary. These are referred to as the oogonial cells or the female germ cells or the egg mother cells. These oogonial cells which are formed, there will be a couple of million oogonial cells that form within the ovary. Please remember that the oogonial cells are found in the ovary, or they differentiate in the ovary, or we can say that they develop in the ovary during the fetal life, that is in the fetal ovary. And not only that, these oogonial cells repeatedly divide and divide by mitosis. So please remember that a lot of these oogonial cells are formed within the fetal ovary because they are continuously dividing by the process of mitosis. So did you understand? So the process of mitotic divisions of these oogonial cells is happening during the fetal life of the developing fetus. So now let us see what happens to some of these oogonial cells. In the fetal stage itself, in the fetal ovary itself, some of these oogonial cells, now I am highlighting this oogonial cell which has decided to stop dividing. So it stops dividing by mitosis and it differentiates into this cell which I am showing, it's colored in blue, and this cell which has now decided that I am not going to divide by mitosis anymore is referred to as the primary oocyte. What do you call this process? This is nothing but differentiation. So one of these oogonial cells has decided that I am not going to divide by mitosis any longer, and it has differentiated into primary oocyte. It is important to note that the primary oocyte is also a diploid cell with a 2n number of 46. The oogonial cell from which it came is also a diploid cell with a 2n number of 46 chromosomes. So you can imagine that each of the oogonial cells, each of the millions of oogonial cells will transform themselves into the primary oocyte the moment they decide to give up on mitosis. Isn't it? So at the time of birth, so what can you see in the ovary at the time of birth? So at the time of birth, you will see primary oocytes. All the oogonial cells which were a product of mitosis have decided to exit mitosis and to differentiate into these cells which are referred to as the primary oocytes. And another very important thing all of you must remember here is the primary oocyte has quit mitosis. So that means it has said that I am done with mitosis, but another very important thing is it has entered. It is very important to note here, it has entered meiosis. See, so it is not going to take part any longer in equational division, but it has entered a cell division cycle that is called meiosis. To be very precise, it has entered meiosis 1. And not only that, after entering meiosis 1, it has become arrested. So please remember, it has become arrested in the first phase of meiosis 1, that is prophase 1 of meiosis 1. So these are the features of the primary oocyte that you all have to remember, that the primary oocyte is the one that quit mitosis, but it is the one that at the same time entered meiosis, and it has now become arrested in the first phase of meiosis, that is prophase 1 of meiosis 1. Clear? So when the child is born, the ovary has, so at the time of birth, if you see the ovary of the child, it will have which cells inside? It will have these primary oocytes. So I'm going to represent primary with a 1 degree. So 1 degree refers to primary and 2 degree refers to secondary. So the ovary at the time of birth has couple of million primary oocytes. Now what happens from the time of, so I told you that at the time of birth there will be a couple of million primary oocytes, okay? Now all of you notice here that throughout the childhood, and then once the child has passed through childhood, the child finally attains what is referred to as adolescence and puberty. Now at puberty, see the dotted line all of you, at puberty, you can see here one of the primary oocytes, actually at puberty every month, you all know that the primates, humans and primate mammals exhibit a monthly reproductive cycle. So every month one of the primary oocytes will step into, and when does this happen? At puberty, will step into meiosis 1. Not exactly step into, because we saw that the primary oocyte has already stepped into meiosis 1. So the right word to use here is it completes meiosis 1. So when does the primary oocyte complete meiosis 1? At puberty. And notice how it forms a tiny daughter cell here and a larger daughter cell. Correct? The tiny daughter cell is called the first polar body. Why is it so tiny? Because it retains a very little amount of cytoplasm. The other daughter cell is a larger one. It is called a secondary oocyte. Notice that what division occurred to give rise to these two daughter cells? Meiosis 1. You all are aware that meiosis 1 is reductional. So what should the chromosome number of secondary oocyte be? It is N is equal to 23. That means the cell has now become haploid with only one set of chromosomes. See how the primary oocyte had two sets of chromosomes, that is 2n is equal to 46, but now after meiosis 1, the secondary oocyte, which is the larger cell, is a haploid cell with n is equal to 23. So the polar body, nothing much happens of the polar body. It just dies because it has very little cytoplasm left in it. Okay, now what happens is this secondary oocyte, now here in the flowchart it is not mentioned, so let me put a dotted line over here. This secondary oocyte will now enter and complete the second stage of meiosis, which we refer to as meiosis 2. So I'm going to write here M2. M2 means meiosis 2. So the secondary oocyte will not stop at it. It will complete its meiosis 2 to form another tiny two daughter cells actually. One of the daughter cells is again a tiny cell, which is now called the second polar body. And the other daughter cell is what we are interested in. It is the functional ovum. So we have one functional ovum that we obtained starting from one primary oocyte and one oogonial cell in the beginning. So the ratio here, as opposed to spermatogenesis, it is 1:1. So I hope the concept is clear to all of you. Please remember that meiosis occurs in two stages, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. So which is the cell that completes meiosis 1? It is the primary oocyte which completes meiosis 1. And which is the cell that completes meiosis 2? It is the secondary oocyte that completes meiosis 2 to form a second polar body, like I said, and a functional ovum. Is that clear? So one ovum at the end of the process of oogenesis, starting from one oogonial cell which becomes one primary oocyte. So please remember, there is, if you start with one oogonial cell, I'm putting it in a simple way here, the one oogonial cell decides to quit mitosis and it differentiates into one primary oocyte, and this one primary oocyte which undergoes meiosis 1, so I'm just going to write it as M1, will become one secondary. I told you there are two daughter cells, however one of them is tiny and it dies, so it gives us one secondary oocyte. And now we saw the secondary oocyte undergoes meiosis 2, M2, to form one functional ovum. So we started with one oogonial cell, we end up with one ovum. Is that clear to all of you? So this is the ratio you need to remember, 1:1 as opposed to 1:4 in the case of spermatogenesis.